All right, Clemson fans, it's time to get serious about 2025. Of course, the Clemson Tigers are hitting the field later this week, and we got Jason Priester here from Clemson Insider to help us break it down. So you can join Jason, of course, each and every day now that the guys are going to camp, and there's going to be news just about every day. But we've got Jason here to break down the Clemson offense, which should be explosive and efficient. It should be a good one, Jason.
Yeah, that's the general consensus, anyways. The hype train has kind of left the building with this team. It has been building up a lot of that centered around the offense. Bunch of guys returning. Um, that Cade Klubnik, going into his senior season, he should have no shortage of weapons. That's for sure.
Absolutely. So let's start with him. He improved from 19 TDs, 9 picks the season before to 36 and 6. And again, I go back to that Texas game. I just think between he and those 3 receivers, they kept it alive for Clemson in a game that otherwise Texas controlled. This guy is basically considered the best in the country for most at this point, until maybe an Arch Manning steps up, or somebody that we haven't seen yet, one of the Ohio State or Michigan quarterbacks, somebody else. But besides them, it's in terms of experienced quarterbacks, this guy's about as good as anybody in the country.
Yeah, you hit on it, man. He improved so much from his sophomore year to his junior year, and in almost every aspect. The turnovers were a big problem. You mentioned the picks, but the fumbles too. I think he was credited with like 10 fumbles as a junior or as a sophomore. I think he lost 5 of them, and he cut down on those dramatically last year. I'm not even sure if he was technically ever charged with one, but protecting the football, that is an area that we have seen market improvement. But so many other areas too, knowing when to run, not to run, pocket awareness, pocket presence, however you want to say it. He was just so much better last year. And he, along with the coaches there at Clemson, they believe there's another step he can take. They think that he's not hit his ceiling yet as far as college, quarterbacks go. And with the kind of talent he's got around him and the experience he's got up front in front of him, protecting him, there's no reason he can't take that next step this year. Um, a lot of that's going to depend on some of the guys around him, but man, he put it all together last year, that's for sure. And if he can continue that progression, man, he could have a really big year.
We've got a heck of a Clemson show on Thursday nights right here, everyone, with Tiger Paul Craven and Jordan Bowman. Thursdays, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Please join the guys every Thursday. Chris Vinson is a rare commodity these days with the blue chip status that he's achieved, that he's hung around this long. Now, obviously, this is Cade Klubnik's team, but Chris Vinson, this team is good enough, or should be good enough, that even if you've got to go to a backup quarterback, that's not you. This team should be prepared, and it not be a case where you just say, "Well, the season's over, Klubnik's down." But if Chris Vinson has been learning well on the job, then he should be able to take over this team, I would think.
Yeah, you kind of hit on it there a little bit with him being a rare commodity. You just don't see guys, especially quarterbacks, that are willing to sit 3 years behind somebody before they take their turn. He's kind of an unknown commodity at this point too, because we just haven't seen a lot of him. If you go back to April of last year when Clemson held their spring game, that he was up and down, still looked pretty raw to me. Thought we saw, a different Chris Vinson in this year's spring game. He just looked like a guy that had been in the program for a little while now and had a better understanding of the offense, game slowing down for him, all that stuff. But again, until you actually see him on the field and see that he can step out and do it when the lights are on, you're just not gonna know. Um, I think the bigger thing with him is he going to be ready to slide in and take over next year when Klubnik's gone. Is he going to be that guy? Because there's going to be some competition for that job, I would think. But I'm kind of with you. If you for whatever reason Klubnik has to miss a game or part of a game or whatever, Vizina's been around long enough and in the same system, and he's working. Been working with the same guys for a while now. There should be some chemistry there. You shouldn't see a ton of drop off in the offense, especially if Vizina is where these coaches say he is. Dabo touched on it a couple of weeks ago during Clemson's big media day, if I'm remembering right. He said that they saw a big jump out of Vizina, particularly during the spring, and they saw exactly what they wanted to see out of him. Not now, a lot of the fans are just waiting to see it, because again, he's just not having many opportunities.
Please like and subscribe here at the Voice of College Football. And of course, check out Jason's work at Clemson Insider. For as really good as this offense was last year, and maybe great as it's expected to be this year, the running back situation is a little precarious. Phil Moff is gone after 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. Then I see a bunch of names of guys that have carried the football, like a Keith Adams or a Jay Haynes, and then Adam Randall. What they did with him late last season, and then in the playoff game, was a bit interesting. But seems to have been, correct me if I'm wrong, an overall shift that he's taken from one position to the next to go to running back. And then you got the 5-star coming in, Gideon Davidson. And usually on this type of team that's expected to be a top 5 team in the nation, you wouldn't be counting on even a 5-star running back, but they may need to.
Yeah, this is kind of the question on offense. How things settle in at running back. Adam Randall came out of the spring. The guy topped the depth chart. Or he was the guy taking the first string reps. Didn't get to see much of him in the spring game. Kind of showed some flashes of what he could do at that position against Texas. He had 3 days to prepare, is what Dabo said. They moved him there 3 days before the playoff game against Texas. Now he's been there all spring. I think it's probably a little bit of a stretch to hope you get the same kind of production that SMU got from their, wide receiver turned running back last year. He had close to 2,000 all-purpose yards. I mean, it's a stretch to suggest you're going to get that. But if you can get 500-600 yards out of him, man, I think that's a plus. I think that's a win. Dabo Swinney said, the week before last, that he fully believes that Adam Randall is going to be one of the great college football stories this year. He also said, I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, but I really believe that we've got one of the great stories here. He's a big kid, 6'3". Klubnik said the other day he's up to 235, 240. Hasn't really impacted his speed, albeit he wasn't the fastest of guys after having some knee issues earlier in his career. But he's an interesting story, and it's going to be. I'm kind of anxious to see how it plays out. Particularly once you get a little bit into the season, is he going to be able to hold off Gideon Davidson? Because by all accounts, that guy killed it in the spring too. He's one of those dudes that can do a little bit of everything. He's not just a between the tackles guy. He can take it around the outside. He can catch passes out of the backfield, and he is absolutely, he's physically ready to go. We'll see how fast he has soaked up all the offense. So those would be the two guys at the top for me. Jay Haynes tore his ACL last December in the ACC championship game. He's not going to be 100% when fall camp starts. Dabo said he's still progressing, so we'll see how long it takes him to get fully back. And then you got the guy that redshirted last year, David Azuiamume, if I'm saying that right. I like to just call him Easy. Saw a good bit of him in the spring game. He kind of, he looked like he was primed to take a jump. Still runs a little upright sometimes. Dabo even had to get on him a little bit about that during the spring game while he was on the mic, talking, preaching ball security to him and not running so up high. And then after that, you got Jarvis Green and Keith Adams. They put Peyton Strecco on scholarship, but a big part of how far this team goes is going to depend on what Adam Randall does at running back and how fast Gideon Davidson soaks it up. I don't know how much to realistically expect from EZ this year. I think he's got all the tools. He just might be one of those guys that needs a couple of years before before he's really ready to be cut loose. I could end up being proven wrong on that. That's just a feeling I get. But, yeah, it's a big part of what they do this year. It's going to hinge on what happens at running back because you can't go out there and throw it 50, 60 times every game, man. You got to have somebody that can run the ball. Obviously, Cade and his ability to make some plays with his legs, that'll factor in too some. But you got to be able to have somebody to tote the ball. And as Clemson found out last year, you need more than one guy ready to go. When Phil Maffa got hurt last year, they just had nobody else to turn to. They basically kept running him out there with one arm all the way up until the Texas game, pretty much. They were still running him out there. So you need more than one guy. It's going to be a big fall for the freshman Gideon Davidson and for Adam Randall too, for that matter.
Well, Jason, I heard you say that you could be wrong about this running back setup, and that Dabo Swinney says he could be wrong, but maybe somebody should tell Dabo, the more you talk, the more chances you have, higher chances of being wrong. We know Dabo likes to go on and on and on, but I enjoy listening to Dabo, so that's all right. These wide receivers are something else. They got a trio that might be the best in the country. The numbers are eye-popping. And again, I go back to that Texas game over and over and over because I looked at the physicality along the offensive and defensive lines and what Texas brought and how they just looked like the far superior team in all conceivable ways, except for Klubnik throwing the ball to these three guys. Antonio Williams, of course, Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore had a great game. And they're all back.
Yeah, and they've got some depth behind those guys, but it absolutely starts with those three. And those guys, as good as they were last year, TJ Moore and Bryant Wesker, they were both freshmen, still learning. Most players tend to take their biggest jumps between year one and year two. If you can get a big jump from both of those guys, man, whew, that would be something. But it kind of starts and stops with Antonio. He has kind of become Klubnik's favorite target when he needs when Clemson needs a play in the passing game more often than not. It's Antonio that Klubnik's looking for. I think he's one of the best route runners in the country. He talked a little bit the other day about how he said, I'm not this 6'4" guy, meaning I'm not going to be intimidating anybody with my size. So I've got to, be sure that my route running's on point. I think he's become one of the better ones in the country. But that downfield passing game, as good as it was at times last year, it still stalled. There were still times where it stalled and Clemson's offense would bog down and have a bunch of 3-and-outs in a row. Wesco got banged up there in the middle of the season. I think that hampered him a little bit a couple of games after he came back. TJ Moore is the one that I'm just so high on, man. I think he's going to have a monster season this year. Then you add this Tristan Smith kid they signed out of the portal, the 6'5" guy who just killed it in the spring game. He gives you that tall, long, outside target, kind of something the room was missing. A guy that had like 70-something catches last year, 900-something yards. And then there's the forgotten man, Tyler Brown, freshman All-American the year before last, hurt all of last season. People are kind of, he's kind of become an afterthought because of all these other guys. He didn't hardly play last year. That gives Clemson two really good slot receivers, man. I think they're going to go 6 deep at receiver when you factor in Cole Turner. You talked about that it being one of the best starting group of receivers. It might be one of the deepest too.
Yeah, I got to say, I just jotted the 3 guys down and then thought you would take it from there, and I wouldn't remember any of those guys. But Tyler Brown, yeah, I remember how good he was the year before. I forgot about him. You're right. People did forget about him, including me.
Yeah. I don't think people are going to be forgetting about him once the season starts. Not for very long anyways. I think, we're going to see a lot of rotating in and out. There's only one ball. There's 5, 6 of those guys. You got to find some way to kind of keep them all happy with the amount of opportunities and targets they're getting. It's a good problem to have, but I don't envy Tyler Grissom when it comes to having to decide how to divvy those reps up.
And Jason, for all the experience and not just talent, experience at wide receiver, there's just about as little experience on the opposite end of the spectrum at tight end, from what I see.
Yeah, with Jake Brennan still moving on, that kind of opens up, some opportunities for the guys that were behind him last year. Olsen, Pat Henry, he got to play. I forget how many snaps it was, but we saw, in his. I don't want to say he got a ton of opportunities, but we saw enough of him, and he flashed when he was out there. To me, it's the guy behind that was a freshman last year, Christian Betancourt, 6'4", 235, 240. He kind of gives you something in the same mold of what Brenningstool was, just not quite as tall as Brenningstool was. One of those big guys that can be a big target in the red zone. Probably played, if I'm remembering right, played more, more of an outside receiver or more of a receiver spot in high school than he did tight end. But I think he's a player that can be another dangerous weapon for Klubnik in that passing game. But I fully believe that Pat Henry is going to be one of those guys that a lot of people aren't talking about before the season, but by about mid-season, most people are going to know who he is. He's not flashy. He's certainly willing to do all the dirty work that it takes to play tight end. Kind of seems to excel at some of that stuff. Aspect that maybe Brenningstool didn't excel out so much, blocking in the running game and those kind of things. I think he likes to get in there and mix it up, but he can also make some plays in the passing game. I just think it's going to be one. I think tight end is going to end up being a strength for this team, despite the fact that Brenningstool's moved on.
All right, folks, you can catch Jason's work at Clemson Insider. You see his X handle right there on the banner. So just follow Jason's work right there on X/Twitter. And again, it's Clemson Insider. And join us here at the Voice of College Football. Please like and subscribe. We got a Thursday night Clemson show at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And with Blake Miller coming back and Tristan Lee, not just starters in 2024, but they've been multi-year starters. Man, this offensive line, which has been a good offensive line, but not in Clemson's heyday. And even in the heyday, sometimes the offensive line was a step or two behind the other units on the offense. This could be Clemson's best offensive line since
a long time.
Yeah.
A long time. They've got 4 starters coming back, actually. You got both tackles. You just said them. Blake Miller, Tristan Lee. You got Ryan Lemph come back at center. You get Walker Parks back. He's got that guy. It feels like that guy's been at Clemson for a decade now. And all you have to replace is Marcus Tate, who was at left guard last year. And you've got some options there of guys that have played a lot of football for Clemson so far. Harris Sewell's played a lot of snaps for Clemson. Colin Sadler's played a good bit, even though he was hurt most of last year. Elijah Thurman got in there some last year, even started a game, even though he got hurt like 4 or 5 plays into it. But, he got his feet wet. So they got some options. But, man, they have got so much experience returning up front. And I think that Matt Luke has been one of those hires kind of on the level with Brent Venables, that Dabo's made since he's been at Clemson. I think it's just transcended that offensive line room, similar to the way the defense was transcended when Venables was hired. He's just had that much impact, and the mindset in that room has changed. I thought they were pretty solid last year in Luke's first year. I think they're going to be so much better this year now that he's had a little bit longer with those guys and everybody's acclimated and used to each other and they know what to expect from him. I think Clemson's going to be really good up front. I could see both Miller and Lee being, all ACC type tackles, and it wouldn't shock me to see a third, maybe even Lemph can be, an all ACC guy at the end of the year. I think they're going to be that good up front.
It is yet to be seen, but a lot of those people that were hammering nails in Dabo Swinney's coffin over the last 3 or 4 years are going to have to flip the hammer around, start pulling them out. And I wanted to ask you about the role of Garrett Riley, of course, who was a big hire a couple of years ago as offensive coordinator. And there was, some speculation as to how much he truly took over the offense. Where do you think all of that stands in regards to Dabo's influence on the offense at this point?
I'll say what I've always said. I don't think that Garrett Riley takes the job unless, he's got the keys to the car. And I based that opinion on having talked to some people. I mean, does Dabo have some say in some things? Absolutely. Is he sitting over there with a play sheet telling them what to call, a third of the game? No. I think he's just got too much other stuff to be worried about. But, as far as Riley goes in his offense, you're heading into year 3. You got a quarterback heading into his 3rd year running this system. You've got a bunch of pass catchers that have a minimum of 1 year experience in this thing. Some of them are going into their 3rd years in this offense. Same with kind of Adam Randall, whether he was playing receiver or running back. He's going into his 3rd year, so he's familiar with all the concepts, the scheme, the assignments, and all that stuff. I think Clemson's biggest thing this year when it comes to the offense, because it was explosive at times last year, but I still think they left, too much meat on the bone a lot of weeks. There were a lot of games where they just went in these spells where they just couldn't do a lot. They'd have, 3, 4 3-and-outs in a row, or 4 out of 5 drives where they didn't run more than 5 plays, go 3-and-out or get 1 first down and punt. I think, the thing you got to strive for this year is to be a little bit more consistent. If you can be a little bit more consistent, then the sky's the limit for that offense. But yeah, I think that's Garrett Riley's show. Make no mistake.